You notice it not because he says less, but because the space between his words widens. The rhythm that once flowed between you now falters. He still texts. He still smiles. But something invisible has pulled back. Not his body, his energy. And that, for the woman who sees with more than just eyes, is the first rupture. This is not a rejection. Not yet. It's a dissonance. A subtle withdrawal of emotional weight. The way he once leaned in, with his breath, with his chest, with the invisible thread that connected his nervous system to yours, that has loosened. You feel it before you understand it, because your feminine body is not just a vessel, it's an oracle. It hears what his mouth hasn't yet spoken. Carl Jung once suggested that the unconscious always speaks first, through symbols, through slips, through patterns. And when a man begins to lose interest, it is his unconscious that defects first, not his intentions, not his declarations, but his essence. His soul no longer reaches, and the feminine feels this loss of reach like a cold wind through an open door. He still shows up, but differently. He responds, but late. He listens, but forgets. You begin to notice that you are repeating yourself, not just in stories, but in presence, repeating who you are in order to be re-recognized. And that repetition is not a ritual. It's a warning, because the masculine, when truly tethered, anchors. He does not drift, but when the thread begins to fray, you become the only one pulling. There is a moment when you begin to shrink yourself in small ways. You take longer to text, hoping he'll notice the gap. You pause your affection, waiting to see if he closes the distance. You stop asking questions he once loved answering, because something in his tone told you not to. This is the first instinct of the woman who senses energetic retreat. She mirrors it, not to manipulate, but to survive. And that mirroring becomes a new dance, one where you both pretend the steps haven't changed, even though the music has stopped. He'll claim he's tired, busy, that life is stressful. And all of that might be true. But so is this. When a man's soul begins to detach, his words become administrative, practical, flat. There is no longer a current moving beneath them, no pulse. He doesn't leave. He just begins to disappear inside himself, and you feel the absence like a phantom limb, something once deeply familiar, now strangely foreign. The most dangerous part? You begin to doubt your knowing, because society has told you that energy isn't evidence, that unless he says, "I'm not interested," you have no reason to feel what you feel. But the feminine lives in the realm of the unseen. She does not need proof. She needs permission to trust her field. This is not about blame. It's about alignment. And when a man is no longer aligned, he doesn't always know it. His ego might still want you. His habits may still crave you. But his essence has already begun to move elsewhere. And you can't follow what doesn't reach. Jung believed that every relationship contains an archetypal contract. And when one soul silently breaks it, the other begins to starve. You are not starving for attention. You are starving for presence, for truth, for the sacred electricity of being seen. And you know, even if no one else sees it yet, that something is dying. Not because he's cruel, not because he's gone, but because his energy no longer bows to you in the way it once did. He speaks, but not from depth. He touches, but not with soul. He answers, but not with longing. And your body knows. Your ancestors know. Your dreams begin to whisper warnings. Before the masculine pulls away in body, he drifts in spirit. And if you don't name it, if you don't honor the ache, you will begin to disappear too. First from yourself, then from him, then from the truth of who you are. And this is where the forgetting begins, before the heartbreak, before the ending. There is always this, the moment his energy leaves the room before his body ever does. And that is how the unraveling begins. Next comes the shift behind his eyes, the gaze that no longer searches for you, even when it looks straight at you. It's subtle at first, the way his gaze begins to flatten. He still looks at you, but it's as if his eyes are no longer arriving. like his presence is standing in the same room, but the soul behind it has stepped into another dimension. You don't know how to explain this kind of seeing, because it's not about where he's looking or even how long. It's about whether his spirit is reaching across the space between your bodies or retreating into itself. You used to feel it clearly, that soft hum when his gaze landed on you and stayed. A warmth that ran through your skin like an invocation, the way his pupils widened ever so slightly when you spoke, the way his body instinctively turned toward yours. Now that electric current is interrupted. He still listens, still nods, still performs the shell of attention. But something deeper is absent, a sacred attention, the kind that leans forward without moving. That's what's gone, not the form, the frequency. Carl Jung spoke of the gaze as one of the most primal transmissions of psychic energy, that the eyes are not just for seeing, but for revealing where the soul is invested. And when a man begins to emotionally exit, the first thing to dull is his gaze, because he no longer wants to be witnessed in the sacred way, nor does he want to witness you. And that is the second sign, when he stops looking into you. This shift is not an act of betrayal. It is a spiritual fatigue. He is no longer willing to be vulnerable through the eyes, because eye contact, when real, is a portal. And a man who has begun to pull away does not want to walk through any more portals that require him to stay. You'll catch it in moments when you speak and he blinks too quickly, when his gaze slides past your face and lands just to the side of your cheek. You'll notice it when he looks down at his phone in the middle of something once sacred, when he interrupts the flow of your sentence with a glance at the television. At first, you tell yourself it's nothing, that men don't always connect through eye contact, that maybe you're too sensitive, too demanding, too hungry. But that hunger, it doesn't come from neediness. It comes from knowing what presence feels like, and the absence of it now gnaws at you like an animal left outside the fire. The body never lies, and your body already knows. You find yourself searching his face during conversations, looking for signs of return, watching for flashes of the man who used to gaze at you like the moon. But now, even when his face softens, there's a slight delay, like a performer remembering his lines just a beat too late. And so, you begin to shift too. You avoid eye contact. You begin looking down more, into your tea, into your hands, into the safety of small gestures, because to hold his eyes now feels like standing in a temple that no longer houses the divine. It is disorienting, because he is still there, still touches you, still calls you by the names that once made you feel like a secret worth keeping. But without the gaze, they are just words, just hands, just echoes. And here's what no one tells you. When the gaze disappears, the mirror breaks. You no longer feel reflected. And without reflection, the feminine begins to fade. Not her beauty, but her aliveness. This is not vanity. This is metaphysical truth. The feminine unfolds in response to being seen, not superficially, but archetypally. She reveals herself in the presence of witnessing, not from approval, but from connection. And when that connection is no longer coming through the eyes, something ancient begins to close. This is where the mourning begins, not for him, but for the version of yourself that bloomed under his gaze, the part of you that felt chosen not for performance, but for essence, the soft, wild, untamed part that danced when he entered the room, not because he was powerful, but because his attention was pure. But now, his eyes no longer ask questions. They no longer hold reverence. They no longer offer sanctuary. And so, you begin to disappear. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like fog when the morning sun forgets to rise. You try to revive the spell, wear the dress he once loved, share the song that once made him pause, touch his wrist the way you used to in the kitchen. And for a moment, something flickers. A recognition, a smile, a return. But it's temporary, because you cannot summon presence from a man whose soul is drifting. And that is the grief. Not that he is leaving, but that his departure is quiet, unspoken, invisible. Jung said that the greatest betrayals are not the ones committed with intention, but the ones that unfold through forgetting. And that is what is happening now. He is forgetting how to see you, not because you've changed, not because you've failed, but because something in him has chosen to close. And when a man closes his gaze, he closes the gateway to intimacy, because the eyes are how the masculine transmits truth. Not just, I see you, but I am still here. And when those eyes no longer lean in, you know, even if he still says your name, even if he still holds your hand, even if he still calls you home, because love is not held in words, it is carried in the gaze. And the moment that gaze goes still, like water with no moonlight, something sacred has already ended. Even if the relationship hasn't, even if the dinners continue, even if no one else notices, you do, and that knowing is your initiation. The moment you stop searching for him in his eyes and begin looking for yourself in your own, there's a kind of touch that once felt like communion, not sexual, not performative, but sacred. The way his hand would settle on the small of your back without thinking, how his fingertips would trace the edge of your shoulder as if recalling a story only your body could understand. Those moments weren't about possession, they were about presence. But now his hands still move, yet something is missing. He still touches you, still reaches for you in passing, but the meaning inside the gesture has shifted, like a letter that arrives without handwriting. It mimics closeness but delivers nothing. And your skin, once awakened by even the slightest contact, now feels oddly untouched, like it's being grazed by memory rather than intention. This is the third sign, when his touch no longer transmits. Carl Jung once spoke of the body as the shadow's first language, meaning the unconscious speaks through instinct before words. And when a man's energy begins to detach from a woman, his body often betrays him first. He doesn't intend to touch you less meaningfully, but his soul is no longer in his fingertips. And you can feel it, not just emotionally, but cellularly. It's as if your nervous system, once attuned to his, now stirs with confusion. He kisses your forehead, but the kiss doesn't land. He pulls you close in bed, but your body doesn't soften. He brushes your arm, and it feels more like habit than desire. Not erotic desire, but energetic desire. The kind that says, I'm here, I'm still listening. I still want to know you through this touch. You try not to notice. At first, you tell yourself he's tired, that maybe you're overanalyzing, that not every touch has to mean something. But you remember what it felt like when it did, and the contrast becomes unbearable. There's a particular kind of loneliness that arrives when a man touches you without feeling you. It's deeper than abandonment, because abandonment is clear. A door closed, a back turned. But this is presence without presence, flesh without soul, body without breath. You lie beside him, your thighs touching, your arms overlapping. But the electricity that once passed between you now lies dormant, like a wire disconnected from its source. And still, he pulls you close, not because he feels drawn to you, but because that's what he's always done. And you, out of longing or loyalty, let him, even though every cell in your body now aches for something he's no longer offering. And that ache is not just for him, it's for you. The version of you that once bloomed under that touch. The woman who once felt seen not through his words, but through his skin. The body is sacred ground, and when it is touched with reverence, it opens. Not just sexually, but spiritually. There were moments before when his hands held you like scripture, as if your collarbone were a prayer, your hips a hymn. And in those moments, you felt not just beautiful, but believed. That belief is gone now, not because you are less, but because he has stopped offering his presence through the body. He may still want you sexually. He may still reach for you at night, but you notice a change in how he does. Less lingering, less breathing, less awe, more friction than flow, more function than fascination. It feels like he's touching the idea of you, not the essence. And your body, once a temple of his wonder, becomes a room he walks through with his shoes still on. This is how the feminine begins to close. Not in rebellion, but in protection. Because the feminine energy does not stay open where it is not honored. It may comply, it may perform, but it does not surrender. And without surrender, touch becomes a transaction. You may try to rekindle it. You wear the perfume he once traced with his nose along your neck. You initiate, you reach. You let your own fingers memorize him again, hoping that memory will awaken something lost. Sometimes he responds. Sometimes it almost feels like before, but it fades too quickly, like heat slipping from a stone after the fire has died. And so you begin to doubt yourself again. Maybe it's your body, maybe it's age, maybe it's hormones. Maybe you're too emotional, too much, not enough. But deep down, in that place inside your chest that knows long before the mind admits, you understand. It's not you, it's the missing transmission. A touch can only awaken what it reaches with intention. Without that, it's just skin against skin, a choreography without meaning. Jung believed that the masculine and feminine are always seeking union, not just in sex, but in essence. And when one stops reaching across the psychic threshold with truth, the dance collapses. Not all at once, but in fragments. This is one of those fragments, and it hurts because it's invisible. No one sees it from the outside. They see the cuddling, the arms around shoulders, the smiles, but they don't feel what you feel, the hollowness inside the gesture. You begin to wonder what happened, where it went, when it started. But there is no singular moment, just a slow erosion of presence. And presence, for the feminine, is oxygen. Without it, no amount of touching can keep you alive. So you start to shrink, not physically, energetically. You recoil just slightly when he reaches for you. You stop initiating. You start keeping score, not out of pettiness, but survival. You begin to hold your own body with more reverence than he does. You wrap your own arms around your waist at night. You lean into yourself when his hands are near, but not in love. This is not bitterness. This is self-rescue. Because the moment his touch became empty, your body started remembering itself. And in that remembering, a choice was born. To mourn what was, or to reclaim what is. That reclamation doesn't always come with words. Sometimes it comes with stillness, with quiet refusal, with tears behind the bathroom door, with the sacred act of closing your own legs, not in punishment, but in protection of the holy. Because your body is not a convenience, it is a cathedral, and only those who know how to pray should enter. When he touched you with devotion, you opened like light through stained glass. Now, he touches you like a habit, and the light has faded. You still want to be touched, but not like this. You want the man who sees you, who feels you through his hands, who remembers your skin is not just skin, but scripture. And until he remembers, you wait, or you walk. But you do not abandon yourself to stay touched by a ghost. It always begins with the smallest of imbalances. You send the first message more often. You plan the next moment together, subtly cushioning it with enthusiasm so he doesn't have to. You ask how he's doing, and when he replies with something vague, "I'm fine. Just busy. Same as usual." You nod, even though something inside you aches for more. But what begins as patience slowly morphs into self-abandonment. You lower the volume of your needs so his silence doesn't feel so loud. You shrink your hunger so he doesn't have to feed it. And that is when the feminine begins to starve. This is the fourth sign, when reciprocity collapses. Carl Jung warned that in any psychic union, when the exchange of energy becomes one-sided, the balance of the soul is disturbed. And that disturbance doesn't look dramatic at first. It looks like you showing up again and again, while he simply exists, present in body, but absent in offering. You start to keep track, not because you want to, but because you have to. A part of you needs evidence to justify what your intuition already knows. The scales have tilted. You give more, you reach more, you feel more, and he maintains, withdraws, avoids, or worse, accepts your offerings without even noticing the weight of what they cost you. The feminine is made to give. That is her sacred nature, but only in places where giving creates rhythm, not depletion. And when you begin giving into a void, a hollow ache forms in your chest. It is not bitterness, not yet. It is a sacred warning from your nervous system. You are nourishing something that no longer nourishes you. He doesn't mean to take without giving. That's the hardest part. He might not even realize it. He believes his presence is enough, that his minimal responses still count, that he's showing love by staying, but staying is not the same as showing up. You notice the change in the way he responds to affection. What once earned a spark now receives a neutral nod. You offer tenderness, and he gives you polite tolerance. You ask questions he used to answer with passion, and now he shrugs them off like small talk. And so, you adjust. You begin overcompensating. You become lighter, funnier, more accommodating, not out of joy, but out of desperation. Desperation to keep alive a connection that now only has one active participant. You rationalize. Maybe he's tired. Maybe this is just a phase. Maybe it's work, family, stress, hormones. But deep down, this is not circumstantial. It's energetic. You are doing the holding, all of it. He no longer initiates the emotional weave. No longer checks in, remembers, surprises, asks. You begin to wonder if he even sees you anymore as a source of light, or if you've become just another fixture in the background of his life. Jung believed that when one partner stops contributing to the energetic container of the relationship, the other begins to fragment. Not visibly, but internally. The self splits into two, the one who gives and the one who watches herself give in vain. You begin to lose access to your own joy. The laughter feels thinner. The connection you once felt with your body becomes muted. You go through the motions of your day, but there's a slight numbness around the edges, like you've wrapped yourself in gauze to avoid feeling how neglected you've become. Neglect, when subtle, is the most dangerous form of abandonment, because there is no event to point to, no betrayal, no explosion, just the slow erosion of mutuality, and it's made worse by the fact that no one else sees it. From the outside, you still look like a couple. You still post photos, still attend dinners, still touch each other in public. But behind closed doors, you are starving, and your hunger is not just for him. It's for equilibrium, for the sacred rhythm of giving and receiving, for the holy reassurance that your efforts are met, not just with acknowledgement, but with return. You used to feel chosen, not because he said so, but because he made room for your soul. Now, it's as if that room has closed. He still lets you enter his world, but only through the narrow hallway of convenience. And so you shrink. Again, you shrink by not asking, not interrupting, not reminding. You shrink by smiling when you want to cry, by saying, "I understand," when you feel abandoned, by telling yourself love requires effort, when this feels more like erosion. There is a grief in realizing you've become the sole caretaker of a relationship. You manage the calendar, the holidays, the birthdays, the hard conversations, the softness, the sex, the rituals, the checking in, the emotional warmth, the future planning, the dreams, the effort. And still, it feels like you are too much. But you are not too much. You are simply alone in your giving. The feminine energy, when not received, becomes depleted, and depletion turns to resentment. But resentment is not the root. It is the byproduct of over-offering without reverence. When the sacred feminine is unreciprocated, she begins to forget her own radiance. She wonders if maybe she has become too demanding. Maybe she is too emotional, too complex, too full. But none of that is true. You are not too full. You are simply too awake to keep feeding something that doesn't feed you back. There is nothing noble about one-sided devotion. Love is not meant to be an altar built by one. It is a temple that requires two to keep it warm. And when only one person is lighting the candles, eventually the fire dies. You reach a moment where you stop trying to keep it alive. Not out of anger, but from truth. The truth that no matter how much you give, you cannot awaken a man who has stopped leaning in. And so, you begin the slow return to yourself. You stop texting first, stop asking, stop managing, stop stretching. And it feels like withdrawal, because it is. But not from love, from the illusion that love must be proven through self-sacrifice. Carl Jung once wrote, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them." And you realize now, perhaps this relationship was not meant to endure. Perhaps it was meant to burn through the parts of you that thought love was earned through imbalance. You are not starving because of him. You are starving because you abandoned your own hunger. But now, you remember what fullness feels like, what equality feels like, what sacred exchange feels like. And the moment you remember, you stop reaching, not in punishment, but in sovereignty. It doesn't come with suitcases or slammed doors. It doesn't come with confessions or long, unraveling monologues. The kind of goodbye that ends these stories, it's not theatrical. It arrives quietly, invisibly. A slow exhale of presence, a sacred vanishing. This is the fifth and final sign, the moment his energy says goodbye before his mouth ever does. You've already felt the symptoms. The unraveling began long ago, through the weightless touch, the distant gaze, the faltering reciprocity. But now the absence is no longer fragmented. It has gathered into something whole, something final, something complete, though unnamed. Carl Jung once suggested that the deepest transformations do not announce themselves. They emerge like shadows behind curtains, only visible when you finally turn around. And what you've turned around to see is the hollowed out space where his presence used to live. He's still here, technically, still answers your messages, still eats at your table, still laughs sometimes, still wears the clothes you bought him, still uses the mug that says us, still touches your back when walking behind you at the grocery store. But something has died, not in anger, not in betrayal, but in disconnection. This death is sacred because it was never meant to be saved. Some relationships are initiations disguised as longevity, and when the lesson is complete, the soul starts leaving, even if the body stays behind. You might ask, why doesn't he just leave? And the answer is, because most men are not taught how to end sacredly, only how to endure silently. So he stays, long after his energy has gone. Because endings, especially gentle ones, require language most men were never given. You see it in his pauses. He hesitates before entering the room where you are. He lingers less at the table. He forgets stories you told him yesterday. He stops making jokes that once made your belly ache with laughter. He kisses you like punctuation, not poetry. You notice the silences grow longer, not loud or angry, just weightless, like air that no longer carries breath. The tension isn't in what is said, but in what isn't, in what has vanished. And then the grief begins, not for what you lost, but for what was never fully claimed. There's no fight, no dramatic scene, just the ache of trying to stay connected to someone whose soul has turned in another direction. Maybe not towards someone else, maybe not even outward, but away from you. This is the goodbye that never gets spoken, because it isn't made of words, it's made of spiritual drift. And when you try to speak it, to name what's dying, he looks at you like you're being too sensitive, too complicated, too much. He says, everything's fine. And it is, on the surface. But the surface isn't where the feminine lives. The feminine lives in the undercurrent, in the shift of tone, in the twitch of the shoulder when he pulls away just a second too soon, in the way his eyes don't light up when you walk into the room anymore. And so you begin to mourn what he won't name. You carry the grief of two. You have become the priestess of a temple he no longer worships in, still tending the altars, still lighting the candles, still sweeping the floors. For someone who stopped praying long ago, this grief is ancestral, because women have done this for centuries, maintained connection while their men slowly evaporated. And no one taught us how to leave first, how to say, this sacred container is no longer alive, how to declare, I will not be the only one staying, because that's what you've been doing, staying, even when he wasn't really there, staying for the memory, staying for the comfort, staying for the possibility that maybe somehow he would return. But men do not return through pressure. They return through awakening. And that awakening, must come from within them. You cannot initiate a man who is not willing to meet you in the shadow. Carl Jung believed that the masculine must descend into his own darkness to truly find himself. And until he does, he will remain only half present, avoiding the depth you offer, because he cannot yet hold it. That is what this goodbye is about. Not the absence of love, but the absence of readiness. You loved a man who wasn't ready to stay fully, and now your soul is ready to stop waiting. There's a moment, one you'll remember for the rest of your life, when you wake up and realize you no longer want to keep asking for what should flow naturally. You no longer want to remind him of your worth. You no longer want to decipher his silences. You no longer want to touch a man who does not reach back with his spirit. This is the sacred threshold, not the kind where you slam doors and pack boxes, but the kind where you silently reclaim yourself, where you look in the mirror and finally whisper, "No more," not because you don't love him, but because you love yourself more than your longing for what he refuses to become. This goodbye does not need a ceremony. It has already been happening. Every day you stopped asking. Every moment you stopped initiating. Every time you closed your eyes in bed and chose peace over another silent war. And when he finally notices, maybe weeks later, maybe never, he might say you changed, that you became distant, that you gave up too soon. But you'll know you didn't give up. You simply stopped pouring into a well that no longer echoed. This goodbye is not the end. It is the beginning of your return. You return to your own eyes, the ones that still shimmer when you laugh alone. You return to your body, the one that still aches to be touched by truth. You return to your fire, the one he dimmed not out of malice, but out of misalignment. And when you walk away, whether with words or just silence, you will do so not with bitterness, but with reverence. Reverence for all you gave. Reverence for all you felt. Reverence for the woman who stayed long enough to know it was time to go. Because sacred goodbyes are not exits. They are initiations into the next version of you. The one who no longer begs. The one who no longer shrinks. The one who no longer waits for him to see what she's known all along. That the sacred feminine does not chase, she calls. And those who are meant to stay, stay by devotion, not obligation. So you gather your energy, not in pieces, but in power. You bless the love, you release the man, and you reclaim the mystery. The part of you that knows, when a man stops reaching for your soul, that is your invitation to reach for your own. And when you do, you don't just say goodbye, you say, "I remember who I am," and that remembering is how the story ends, or maybe how it truly began. Thank you for staying through this sacred unraveling. If you felt seen in these words, it's because this path was written for you. You are not alone, you are not too much, you are not unworthy, you are awakening, and that is everything. Until next time, walk in softness, power, and remembering.